Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Gong, the podcast hosting conversations about the earliest stages of startup sales and all the fun stories that come from companies with little cash, no precedence, and lots of guts. My name is Adriel, and I will be your host today. And today, our guest is my good friend, Kat Lee. Kat is one of the most experienced consumer tech growth executives probably of the last decade or two. She's held leadership positions at both Facebook and Pinterest really early on in those companies and had a lot of visibility and also a lot of agency, a lot of decision-making power over how those two companies really made their strategic decisions about how to grow their user bases. We got into a lot of the tactics that Facebook especially used to grow. Kat was really involved with their pivotal Facebook developer platform. And so she gets really into the strategy that company had early on when they were just a few hundred people, but how important developers would be to Facebook's growth and how to make Facebook a true platform. And I think that there's a lot that we can learn there because she even talked about some of the mistakes they made, like waiting too long to put in guidelines, the pros and cons of that. She talks about how to do things differently now. You know, if you're building a company to compete against Facebook now, or you're building any sort of online business now, there's a lot of factors that have changed in the climate, both socially and technically, that make building a business very different today than it was when she was working on building Facebook. And she has a really good sense for that. Kat's also a partner at Maveron. Maveron is a leading early-stage consumer tech company. And so her experience both in the industry at places like Facebook and Pinterest, at Pinterest she was the head of culture, so we talk a lot about the kind of cultures you need to create to have a really high growth team. So our experiences both in the industry and as an investor, having been at Maveron, which is one of the leading consumer tech firms, consumer tech venture capital firms, and seeing hundreds of startups a year, makes her a fantastic person to discuss things around growing consumer tech businesses. And she's super smart, super sharp, and constantly smiling. So it was an absolute pleasure, as it is every single time, to speak with Kat. And I hope you enjoy my conversation with the wonderful Kat Lee. Kat Lee.
Yeah.
Welcome to
Hi.
The Gong.
Thank you for having me.
I love your sweater. Your podcast attire is primo.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. It says don't panic.
Yep, it says don't panic.
Generally good advice for anybody.
Absolutely.
Especially anybody working in sales. Deals are falling apart. Everything's crashing, but don't panic.
Right.
But stay mellow.
It's kind of my mantra.
Yeah?
Right? At the end of the day, like, it's sort of like just breathe. Don't panic.
Yeah. What else is there?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're going to lose your head while in the midst of the chaos.
Yeah,
You're
so
in the
much
wrong
of it
place.
is that's controlling the chaos.
You spent quite a bit of time in chaos. This was not a segue that I planned, but it's poetic. You do growth,
Yes.
which is chaos.
I mean, I like to think of it as, in some ways, like, that kind of chaos fuels me. It's what I'm motivated by. I think that's the most exciting period of time within any company is when there is that chaos and this sort of like passion, as well as the like amount of things that you have to do is always more than the people you have. That's always the best time at a company or any startup.
Yeah. Mark Cuban's got a line that's something along the lines of sales cures all. Which sounds like the similar thing, like that growth is what people are looking for, and that growth is what drives everything, and that growth is what brings great people inside. Is that, you think that's about right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's a great problem to have, right? If you are, if you feel behind, or if you feel like there's just way too much to do, and you can barely hold everything together, it means that you're doing something right.
What's the most insane period of growth you've been around or involved in?
I think, numerous times, both in terms of when I first joined Facebook, and it was early 2008, the Facebook platform has just launched. We went from building widgets on profiles to enabling the first time that we're allowing you to log into Facebook from across the web and Facebook Connect. And that period of time was incredibly exciting and chaotic because my role was to manage FB Fund. It was a set of capital, pool of capital from Excel and Founders Fund to invest in developers who are building on the platform. And the initial...
So even in 2008, Facebook, because Facebook in 2008 when you joined was smaller than MySpace.
Oh, yes.
For context, like
Yes.
MySpace was dominant.
Yes.
And you guys were already leveraging capital to let other people build upon your platform?
Yeah, and one of the reasons or the thoughts behind it was that we were not sure that developers would want to build on the platform. And so the initial investors, along with Chamath, came up with this idea. I think it was modeled after the Apple iFund, to create a similar program at Facebook to encourage developers to build. But really, developers came and built, and in fact, too many developers came and built. But the fund actually helped, from a marketing standpoint, position the platform into inspiring people to understand what are the types of use cases that are, in some ways, the quintessential examples of what it means to create and take the social graph outside of Facebook.
The iFund, I'm totally guessing. I haven't heard of it before, but it was Apple was investing in startups building apps.
Yes.
To make the App Store more attractive.
Yeah, because they just launched their own developer program.
And so you said the Facebook FB fund was too successful? You got people were coming to Facebook with or without you?
I mean, I think that in some ways the fund didn't need, it was originally developed to incentivize developers to build on the platform. It almost wasn't necessary because people did come to build on the platform. It was just something new, and there was a lot of excitement around these developer communities. There was this feeling, especially at the very early days, of just being able to quickly get started and build something that was useful and used by millions of people. And then, Facebook did a great job, the platform team did a great job of thinking initially, maybe not carefully enough, of the distribution channels, which allowed a lot of this ecosystem of apps to grow. But the fund was helpful in terms of helping position what are the types of companies that we think could be meaningful examples to hold out there as case studies for what this kind of technology or the social graph kind of enables.
Yeah. Well, is that who was building? What were they building? Bring me back to 2008. Is this where Zynga came in? Did they make me play Mafia Wars in Farmville? Was that your fault, Kat? Were you making me farm carrots while I should have been doing homework?
I know. There were numerous games, and Zynga and Mafia Wars were obviously part of it. But, when we first launched FB Fund, we really wanted to think through or see what were the best examples of usage of the social graph. One of the best examples at the time was Zimride.
Social graph, can you define that?
Oh yeah, it's the connection of you and everyone you know, right? It's like who you are connected to socially, and then this computer sciencey term of the graph, this data set that we represented the connection of friendships as a graph. And we always called it the social graph.
So Facebook understood that the core value is understanding how people are going to interact based on who they interact with.
Yep.
And so you were trying to figure out which kinds of applications are going to help people interact in more of the ways that you want them to.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, the mission of the platform, or the goal of the platform, was to there was a fundamental philosophy, or there's a philosophy around, we believe the world is better if you're connected to the people you care about. If you could take that set of people that you care about and have them be a part of your experience on TripAdvisor, or in the case of FB Fund, we funded Zimride, were the two people.
Is that Lyft?
Yes.
Zimride, yeah.
Yes.
There you go, some startup history for you.
Yeah.
They started as Zimride. I think they were doing busing or something.
Yes, yeah. And Zimride was an early FB fundee. We put in a $125K convertible note, and I like to brag that when they went public, that was worth $50 million.
Really?
So
nice job.
At the end of the day, I think there were a lot of great examples. TaskRabbit also was one part of it. It's where can you imagine these use cases where if you had a sense of understanding of the relationships and how they're connected to you and how that could make the experience of what that application was trying to build better. Zimride started as a carpooling app, right? They were carpooling from here to Santa Barbara or to down south. And so knowing your friends or friends of friends, it just made it easier for you to make those connections. Same with TaskRabbit. Initially, they were sort of a task errand running platform, and just knowing the people and who you're somewhat connected to socially would help improve that experience.
What metrics were you guys targeting? Was it what did Mark tell you? Hey, Kat, go get me more advertising revenue or more users in the
35 to 55-year-old category? Like, what were you trying to grow at the time? What were the marching orders?
So I was on the product marketing team, and I think that the most important thing for us was to try to identify what are these case studies, what are these use cases that can really bring can inspire hundreds, if not thousands, of apps to be developed. How do we create the ecosystem? And so to create the ecosystem, it was trying to be very strategic about the verticals that we wanted to highlight examples in. We always thought about news being more social. Like, what are the things? Like, what are the stories?
What are my friends reading?
Yes, what are my
wrote
friends
what?
reading?
Friend
Who
of a friend wrote
right.
this piece. Yeah.
And so we thought that same thing with the commenting piece. Like, wouldn't it be great if you could see the comments from your friends on that news platform?
So foolish were we. So naive. Wouldn't it be great if comments from everybody were visible to everybody?
Well, and your real identity was used. There was like a lot of sort of assumptions and sort of hypotheses that were kind of put in place. And like our job as a team was to find these examples and activate them. So it was very much in some ways like early partner development, where we would reach out to a bunch of sites like CNN, New York Times, and convince them about the power of what social can bring, the distribution channels that were offered by Facebook, and worked with them hand in hand to envision what could this product integration look like? What could it look like to be on the New York Times, and what could it look like to be embedded in a TripAdvisor? And it was a sort of small SWAT team of people which had a goal of every F8, which was our annual developers conference, we would surface these great examples across all of these different verticals that would then inspire, hopefully, a whole new set of people to try out the platform.
How long did you spend at Facebook?
I was there for the 4 years leading up to the IPO, so 2008 to 2012.
And they went public right after you
right?
left?
No, right. Literally the week after I left. I mean, I obviously knew that.
Yeah. It wasn't a cat's gone, we can make this thing happen.
Yes. And I saw that, incredible growth in terms of team from 400 people to 4,000 people in 4 years. And so that was an amazing experience in terms of being able to see what it took, or at least be a part of something that felt really meaningful. Also felt like one of the few companies that have gone through that type of hyper-growth journey, both internally as well as externally, right? As you mentioned, MySpace was smaller than Facebook when I started. Obviously, when I left, Facebook was on its way to, billions of users.
I think 2008 was that year where MySpace was doing MySpace had 75 million active users a month. Facebook had 100 for the whole year.
Yep.
And then 2009, MySpace was cut in half, and Facebook really began to grow. What was it like being you at that time? You were fairly young in your career. You were at this 400-person company, and all of a sudden it's a 4,000-person company, and you had only aged 4 years worth of wisdom. What were some of the biggest challenges that you had growing as a growth person at an environment like that?
I think, I made this transition. So for context, but prior to Facebook, I was in grad school, and prior to that, I worked at Lockheed Martin as a software engineer. So there was a big sort of shift in terms of cultural shift, but it was what I yearned for and signed up for, because I knew that Lockheed Martin was not the culture that I wanted to be a part of.
They weren't 10X.
No, and it was I have a lot of respect for the company, but at the same time, they were not a high growth startup. And I knew that was what I signed up for when I crashed the pizza party in grad school to talk to the recruiter and the engineering manager about how much I really wanted to work at Facebook. And then, so when I started, I naturally was, I think I feel like I ended up in the right place at the right time. I joined this amazing team, the platform team, where, our team was composed of Sanjay Lu Huang, who ended up being the head of product at Quora and now is at Chan Zuckerberg leading all of product. Mike Vernal, who was also there, and he was leading engineering. Charlie Cheever, Josh Ellman, Dave Moore. And this was a very special time with amazing people. And I had, I think it was a lot of hard work. Everyone worked probably nearly 7 days a week. And we worked really long hours, but at the same time, there's this camaraderie and sense of purpose that I take with me, because there was so much belief in what we were trying to do and ourselves, and how much agency each person had, in order to have that impact and make a difference.
You guys were on such a freaking roll during that period of time. Is there anything, when you think about your work specifically in growth, any mistakes or any stories that are of failed experiments that you remember?
So at Facebook, to be clear, there was a growth team, and then there's also this platform team. And our version of growth was really developing the ecosystem. And I would say that one of the things that I probably think one of the things I think we did really well is in continuing to drive inspiration, branding, and agency to the community of developers. But where I think we didn't do as well is in managing and anticipating some of the interaction with those developers, being a little bit more strategic around thinking through the policies and how developers and what they were incentivized to do could impact positively and negatively the experience of the overall Facebook users.
So, for example?
For example, I mean, you just mentioned like in the early days of platform, sort of anything went. When we opened up all the distribution channels.
Move fast and break things.
Yeah, so there was a lot of spam. Right, a lot of buggy experiences and a lot of bad user experiences where you just didn't even know, like, did my friend really do this or not? Right, like you would get all of these sorts of messages, and there wasn't a lot of guidelines at that time in the very early days put on developers to. And the guidelines and the policies were being developed in real time as developers were building and pushing the boundaries of those policies.
What would you advise you're only able to say these were the mistakes we made, we moved too fast, because, I mean, look what Facebook became. Obviously, a big part of the culture of Facebook's success was that moving fast, making mistakes, trying to fix it as quickly as possible as you went along. What advice would you give to a founder today doing these things? Is it the same thing? Like, hey, it's cool. Like, you're going to make mistakes. It's fine, but fly as fast as you can and, like, make those errors? Or is it, hey, I did that at Facebook. Sure, we grew, but that was an anomaly. Like, move a little bit slower, be a little more thoughtful about these things?
I think that the consumer sentiment has changed. You know, if I think about the portfolio companies that are within Maveron and even the startup founders that I know today who came out of Facebook or Pinterest or all of these sort of unicorns, there's a different way of going about building these experiences. The user expectation is a lot higher in terms of the quality.
People get pissed pretty quick now.
Exactly. Yeah. People get pissed really quickly. People are you know, it's way easier to turn off notifications and not grant permissions. And I think the audience, like the younger generation, is a lot more aware of the consequences of being always on. So I do think you see a shift in terms of how people develop products. I think people are a little bit more thoughtful, or not even a little bit, a lot more thoughtful. And some of that is the platform shift from web to mobile, because I think there's just a higher bar in terms of when you are interacting with an app on your phone. You have this level of expectation that the app has been developed to a point where there is a lot of accountability if it's not done well, right? Like, there are app reviews now. There are no website reviews really for.
Why do you think that is? That because 12 years have passed and now this ecosystem exists, or is that because we feel, you know, my computer's only there when I want it, but my phone's with me there always?
I think it's probably a lot of factors, right? It's the factor of I think it's easier, in some ways, like, it's easier to continue to iterate on web versus on mobile. There's a little bit more of a barrier to iterating as quickly. I do think that the guidelines and sort of the platforms that own, like, both mobile platforms have, like, they have been very thoughtful about the types of apps that get promoted and that get reviewed and approved. I also think that there's probably, in some ways, the consumer attitudes towards apps and websites have changed. I do think the quality has evolved, and the level of thinking has evolved as a result of seeing the consequences and learned lessons from not being thoughtful.
Yeah, let me test this thesis on you here.
Yeah.
When a company is working on a brand new technology,
yeah,
which is what Facebook was doing with social networking in the mid 2000s, which is what a self-driving car company might be doing now, which is what a VR company was doing, you know, maybe 4-6 years ago. When they're working on a brand new technology, the UI is allowed to be lower. The expectations of customers are lower because they've never seen anything like it before. When a company, and so the way you acquire customers there is just solve some massive problem, go after it, and it's okay for the UI to be a little lower. When you're going with a technology that's more developed, such as developing mobile apps today. It's been almost a decade and a half since the iPhone launched. You need to be solving one problem, but the bar you need to set for UI is so much higher because you're taking customers away from an incumbent. If you're trying to build a social network today, you're not building a direct Facebook competitor, but your thing for dog owners who like to feed their poodles cool treats, social network, is taking people away from a Facebook group, and your UI needs to be at that level.
10x. Probably 10x. There has to be something very differentiated, and it's not just Facebook. It works in any industry. Like because Amazon has provided such a great e-commerce experience, and it's so easy to buy things and return things on Amazon. It's even harder also for a lot of these D2C companies. They have to provide some sort of other unique differentiator because people are so used to the level of service they get from Amazon.
Tell me about that. How does a company compete against an Amazon or a Facebook today?
I mean, I think that they have to have, in some ways, they have to compete in a way that Amazon is not. So they have to build some brand affinity, they have to understand their customer and provide a level of service that's unique and differentiated. They have to have a product that is really hard to copy, as well as maybe a unique material or a unique value prop that is solving a different customer need than anything that Amazon can do. Obviously, the brands within our portfolio, everything from Allbirds, Everlane, Dolls Kill, I think they've really created their brands and retail stores to be an experience, and they really understand their customers in a way that drives that loyalty.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the first part I especially agree with, where you got to know your customer better than anyone else. Mm-hmm. And it seems like there's two ways to do this. One is, you mentioned Allbirds, for example. They're a company that just has a better product or different enough product from a Nike and a different enough distribution channel from an Amazon, where Nike's not going to launch a competitor to beat out Allbirds necessarily, and Amazon Basics is not going to launch, or Amazon Fashion, whatever the thing is called, is not going to launch something that's cooler tree bark shoes or whatever than Allbirds. But then you also have the other side of things, and I love this one, where it feels like you are directly competing against Amazon, but you know your customers so damn well that you're going to build services they never even dreamed of having. I think an awesome example of this is like Chegg, the textbook rental company, right? Like textbook rentals, what could possibly be more competitive to Amazon? But by only doing this one thing for students, they then went into tutoring and lesson plans and all these other things that students, A, never thought possible, B, Amazon would never give them, because for Amazon to do anything right now, they need to get at least another $1 billion in revenue from it. And for them to have all they're trying to do is serve 80% of customers 80% of the way.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, Amazon did try to copy Allbirds.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, there was like a little bit of a dust up. And if you can like Google it, Joey went on the record.
Joey's Mr. Allbirds himself,
yes,
right? New Zealander, Australian?
No, that's Tim.
Oh, that's Tim.
So right. Joey's the co-founder, and he basically said that like if Amazon wants to copy anything, they literally had a shoe that looked like an Allbirds, but wasn't made of environmentally friendly materials. So they're like, look, if you're going to copy us, at least copy our like the thing that makes us us. Like
it's not
they stand for sustainability.
It, yeah.
It's not like the shoe design itself. It literally is the people love the fact that they're doing good and that when they wear Allbirds, it is it started out, it is a comfortable shoe, but beyond being a comfortable shoe, they really like what Allbirds stands for and that they're a carbon neutral company. Yeah. And so Joey's like, if you're going to copy us, copy that.
Over the last 12 years or so that you worked in tech, how much do you think the importance of marketing the mission has grown? I mean, you mentioned Allbirds. It's not just the shoe; it's the vision of what buying shoes like this might possibly stand for. Glossier is the same thing. It's not their makeup is not better necessarily than anybody else's, but it's what it means to buy makeup from them. Was that the same thing 12 years ago? And yes or no, how can a startup take advantage of that today?
It's certainly not true 12 years ago. I definitely think that you see that if you look at all the sort of consumer understanding consumer behaviors, it has shifted over the last few years, and it's definitely more true with millennials and even more true with Gen Zers, where they are looking for companies that align with their own personal values and their own personal mission and things they care about. So more and more, I think we're going to see companies continuing to understand what are their own set of authentic values and how do they cultivate an audience that understands that and at the same time it brings them some ways, loyalty from that audience because they resonate with the personal values. But that being said, I think people know that this is like a consumer behavioral shift, that many big brands have also tried to do this and have tried to do this in a way that
Nike's doing a lot of that right now with the Colin Kaepernick thing.
Yeah, and I actually think Nike's doing a pretty good job with it. I'm just saying, like, maybe I don't want to call out any brands, but you can definitely find the examples.
Let's call them out. This is we strike beef on the Gong podcast.
I mean, you could take Gillette, right? And Gillette tried to do that commercial. You
the
take
best a man can be.
Right, exactly. And I think you have I remember there was a quote from the head of Unilever that announced at Cannes Lions this year where he was just like, they're going to look at their portfolio of brands, and anyone that doesn't have a set of values that are core and authentic to them, they're going to get rid of them because it's so important to the next generation. Yeah. But I think it's so important to make sure that it is authentic. And I think that the older brands are going to struggle to find that voice.
How can a small company, let's take the super small, if you're Unilever and your marketing budget is the size of a mid-market company's revenues for a year, you can do that. You can experiment and say, hey, let's see what this whole purpose thing is about and see if it works for us. If you're 10, 20, 50 people and you're doing $500,000 to $5 million in revenue, how do you see companies or heads of growth or CEOs struggling with this balance of like, we're just got to survive until tomorrow, let alone this whole mission thing, versus on the other side of the spectrum, like, we are the mission is us, we want to tell it to the world?
I mean, there's no one right way to do it. I mean, what I've seen some of our portfolio companies who are around that size do, that they do really well, is some people take a very community-based approach, like a community-driven approach, where in some ways we call it like high tech with high touch. You kind of have to bring the two together in order to find your people, find the messages that resonate with them, and then build off of that. At the same time, you can't just, messaging and branding can only take you so far. You have to have a product that meets that need, right? And that aligns,
otherwise
right?
you're yoga babble.
Exactly.
You're just changing the world and making the world a better place. But what do you
and there is a lot of that too, right? There's a lot of that too. And I think you have to validate that you have a really good product that meets that need, that actually has sort of word of mouth growth because it's such a good product that stands for itself. The evolution that we like to tell our founders is you start with a really great product that fits a consumer need. In the case of Allbirds, the world's most comfortable shoe. They own that. They can then build a brand on top of it because they've earned the right to build that brand. And then beyond that, they then earn the right to build a movement, which is around sustainability. And I think you see that with that progression with a lot of different companies. So for an early startup, the most important thing is find your playbook for finding and understanding your customer, building proof points to know that this playbook is going to continue to help you scale. And then at the same time, hopefully you have the product and technology that actually makes it scale. And I would say if I think back to the Pinterest playbook, that was the Pinterest playbook too. Pinterest started out as this, I mean, in some ways it's a content marketplace. Of a collection of things that people have curated and pinned from the web, and started off as a website, but the technology existed, but there was no community there. And it was only until Ben reached out to a set of bloggers at the Blog Her conference in Utah, where he sort of built this community of bloggers that understood the platform. They all had sort of similar interests. It started out with this woman, Victoria, who runs the blog SF Girl by Bay, and she blogged about home decor and created a board called What Home Means to Me and started this campaign around tagging other bloggers, getting them to do the same. But it was this community of bloggers that knew each other, both online and in real life.
Or were they
doing
this
it was
just
completely
because
I think they really liked the product and then saw that it was this kind of cool way of visually organizing what inspires them. And that was the start of the Pinterest community. And I do think that playbook that was used in the very early days was continued to be used as we launched into new markets, into different, into different countries where Pinterest, whether that was in the UK or in, in Japan, there was always this sort of similar start of finding a set of influencers, bloggers, people who had taste that was very local to that market to curate a lot of the initial boards that would then sort of help start the marketplace within that market.
You know, Pinterest was recently called the nicest company in the Valley.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I might have seen that article. It was related to culture too.
Yeah, you guys are so nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that at the very, what's funny is that in the very beginning, it used to, I think, irk us a little bit because it's like, what?
Because you want to be like you're competing against Facebook and Google. You're all brilliant people, and you're all trying to fight for growth and things.
But I think that I would say a lot of the culture comes from our founders, or it starts with the founders, I should say, and then it evolves over time. And Ben and Evan are at the very, to their core, they're just incredibly genuine, authentic, nice people.
So you at Pinterest went from doing growth to doing culture.
Yes.
Right? What does a successful growth culture look like? If I'm a early stage CEO or had a growth or had a sales at again, let's call it a 50-person company, and I'm trying to get to 200, what should I be thinking about when forming my team?
I mean, at the very beginning, it is about, I think that that question or the answer to that question should change. It changes over time because as you continue to grow and scale, your challenges and things that you're trying to accomplish change over time. At the very beginning, I think it's about trying to be deliberate about building the product, right? So in the very early days, it's very much focused on how do you create that initial product? How do you get to that product market fit? What shows that you have product market fit? And then, at the point that I joined Pinterest, it was 35 people. We had just started the first version of the growth team. So it was at the very beginning instrumenting, well, what is growth? Like, what are the things that we're choosing to measure? What drives engagement? And how do we quantify that or articulate that in a way that aligns the company into understanding what we want to focus on over the next few years?
What are some of the things you guys landed on?
I mean, at the very beginning, it was, so Pinterest started as a website, and I think 2012 was our transition from web to mobile. So at the very beginning, it was about understanding how are people coming to Pinterest, and we went from invite only to opening it up so that anybody can sign up. So that was like our first big transition. And then after that, it's like...
Sorry, why were you invite only at first?
I think, so a couple reasons. And actually, it served very much, was a very successful, deliberate decision. So initially, I think that invite only was created to ensure that the right set of content was getting curated. I think that in some ways, by making it invite only, it also created demand for the product and allowed the product to grow very organically via word of mouth. Because it was invite only and because it was sort of continued to be shared by bloggers, people in the blogging community, a lot of them knew each other and they heard about it and everybody started asking for, how do I get an invite? So there was some virality that was built in to it being invite only.
It also makes you want to be a part of a thing. My girlfriend was telling me that her friend of hers today who spent a year on a wait list for a wine club, just got off the wait list,
right?
Doesn't really need any wine,
yes,
but decided to buy a $160 bottle of wine because if she doesn't buy a bottle a month, she has to wait another year because she's put on the wait list again.
Oh, no.
So she's like, whatever,
yes.
Let me just buy the thing.
Yes.
I spent time.
You
there you
go.
Made it into the club.
Exactly. Yes. And I do think that there's...
tricky growth people, Kat.
I mean, there's a lot of benefits, too. Like, there's that. There's the FOMO kind of psychological piece of invite only. But then I do think that, like, from a platform standpoint, it made it a lot more of... it made it a better experience because this is where... going back to the Facebook discussion, the initial developer platform was open to everyone. And so when you're open to everyone, there's a long tail of good apps and bad apps, like really bad apps, like bad apps that I would be embarrassed to share about because they did terrible things. And I think the Apple App Store, by being such a closed platform, they had control over what was on the platform and what wasn't. By being invite only, I think similarly, Pinterest was able to create a beautiful experience for users and which was consistently delivering value to a certain subset of users, but there was enough control there that, it was a lot more deliberate than if everybody was allowed on the platform.
Do you think your trajectory would have been different, or how would your trajectory have been different if you were never invite only? Is it, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of somebody, again, at a smaller company now. Oh, wow, cool, Pinterest is invite only, great idea, maybe we should do it. On the one hand, you get to be more controlling of your user group. You get to say, hey, we're only going to grow at this rate. Hey, we're getting this kind of individual. Let's build the tools for this kind of individual and not serve individual B. But on the other hand, it does limit your exposure to spontaneous eruption, right? Like, oh my God, out of nowhere came this group of people, and you couldn't have that if you were invite only.
Well, especially if you're a small team, I think that like in the Facebook case, on the developer platform case, I mean, a small team of people firefighting 24 hours on the customer service side, trying to like help prevent spam, message users, and there was always this queue that was like never ending. So the team was too small to truly like do that. So invite only, there's never a right answer to this question because it's a matter of, well, what does invite only enable you to do? Well, given the size of your team and how limited the support is, invite only allows you to control your growth. And what does that enable you to do? Well, if the product's not totally there, then it gives you more time to continue to improve upon the features so that you can create the right MVP. It also creates the right norms so that you can figure out who is this working for, who's it not working for. And so it gives you some visibility into the customer segments and gives you more confidence as you're going into raising your next round, or as you're thinking about like, how do I continue to scale this? You know which customer segment it's working for. You can again go talk to them. You can then elicit them to become moderators on your platform, get them more involved. And what that does from a product perspective, especially if you're building a marketplace or a platform, is it creates the right norms so that the next person, like the next 100th person, 1000th person who comes in, they're like, oh, I get what this platform is for. So the downside is if you do that too deliberately, sometimes you don't open yourself up to new use cases. So in the case of Pinterest, I would say that to a certain extent, maybe we waited a little too long to open up invite only because a lot of the early audience were women who had very similar interests. Food, home decor, quintessentially, especially back then, DIY, weddings.
Isn't it now like 80% of Midwestern women between the ages of 20 and 50 are Pinterest users?
I mean, early on, sure, yeah. And I think now it's a little bit more balanced. But I think that in the very early days, while it was we were building and continuing to grow engagement via word of mouth, we kept it invite only until 2012. And then 2012, when we opened it up, it was then opened up to everyone. But then because we weren't deliberate about bringing on different segments of users, it was a terrible experience for any guy signing up the platform because I think it was very hard to control like who they should follow. If they searched for anything like black shoes, they'd probably get a bunch of high heel results.
Do you think that brings an interesting question. Do you think that the product and the team, going back to when you said your customer service team was too small to grow, do you think the product and the team should be one step ahead of growth, or should growth be one step ahead of the product or the team? What I mean is would you advise now the companies that you work with at Maveron to say, hey, don't worry about it, like grow, go get those male users even if your product isn't ready yet, or take down the invite only, like you'll hire your customer service people work extra hard for 2 months and then don't worry about it, like we'll hire great people? Or is it the other way, like you always want your product to be one step ahead of your user?
I think if the ideal case is like if you're a part of a hyper-growth startup and that's what you aim to be, you always want to hire ahead of where you are. And you also want to plan ahead for when you're going to need that set of people, because especially if you're looking for really great people, it's not going to be...
They're not available.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whenever you need them.
So be very strategic about who you're looking for and who you're hiring for ahead of when you need them. And then, hopefully it's also a great problem to have if you happen to grow way more than you can handle. Because that's the chaos. So it's never one or the other. It's bad if you have a bunch of people and like the growth isn't there. So there's always this balance between doing both of those things.
Yeah. Well, what kind of advice do you give the startups you work? By the way, at Maveron, what kind of stage do you invest in now?
We invest in Series A and seed.
So really early companies.
Yeah, very early.
What kind of advice do you give them around pricing? And I'll ask that in two ways. The first is, back when we were talking about mission, can you price mission or can you make mission a part of the calculation of your price and say, my shoes would normally sell for $100, but since I'm shoes made from tree bark and not only comfortable but environmentally friendly, I'm going to charge $120. Like, can that ethos be part of the price? A, but B, how early do you want your super early companies right now, seed, Series A, to be thinking about the economics of their model? There's been a lot of stuff back in the 90s when economics didn't matter. But even now, Casper just went public and they're super, super in the red and their stock went down immediately. WeWork busted because of all that other stuff. Uber and Lyft have been struggling a ton. Most tech companies that went public in the last year, Pinterest and many others included, are not profitable. How early do you guys push your portfolio companies to think about the economics and the viability of their pricing models?
Well, I would say that we can't control the macro market, and I would say that the sentiment of the market has shifted from growth and growth at all costs to thinking about sustainable growth and having a path to profitability. And so I do think that as that shift is happening, what you're seeing is that a lot of companies are being a lot more thoughtful in how they communicate and really start to work on that path to profitability. And so I would say that, at the very earliest of stages, I think we want to, it's obviously generally not there. But at the very earliest of stages, it's something that we talk with the founder about and just how they're thinking about the unit economics. So coming back to your question about pricing, we want them to be thoughtful as to where they are and why they've made the decisions they've made, and then think through how over time there is a plan towards getting the company to a place where it will be really attractive to new investors as well as eventually, hopefully, the public markets. And I think as they continue to go down the path of later and later stage, they need to be a lot more thoughtful about it because they need to have predictability around that story to future investors.
Yeah. And what about how do you price for mission? How do you price for purpose? Can you price for purpose?
I think that, in a vacuum, that question's not super relevant because in some ways it kind of depends on the cost of the materials and everything else that goes and how they're reaching their customers. And then it's something that I think that they have to test on like I said, it's more like looking at the landscape. What are their competitive products and how are they priced and where do you fall relative to that? And how are you positioned compared to those products? And what type of customers are you going for? So it's really hard to know how to do the pricing in the vacuum.
The reason I ask is because when we were making the comparison between Allbirds and Nike, Nike can do all this purpose-driven stuff, but then people still throw a riot and say, but you have child labor in your factories, which is another complicated issue. But they might talk about purpose, price super low, but have some purpose issue, whereas another company might say, hey, we only build in very fancy American factories, or everybody works an 8-to-4 job and is super well taken care of. Can you price higher for things like that?
I mean, I would say that you also have a company like Everlane, to give you another example, where it's completely transparent to the consumer how pricing is done, right? Like they literally on their website, it's about transparency of the supply chain. So they tell you exactly how much this costs, and then they add a standard markup. So you see that. And that's their commitment and their with their consumers. Yeah. So there's no one right way to do things, but I do think that you're starting to see like really interesting business models and ways of pricing that seem more aligned with, I think, what the new consumer is looking for.
What are some of the coolest companies you're investing in right now? Which ones have you invested in that you're excited about?
Well, let's see, that I can announce. Well, I would say that in general, a lot of our companies in our portfolio are really exciting. They're not all done by me personally, but done by Maveron. Most recently, we announced funding in ODIS. It's a company based in New York. They are trying to build the NASDAQ of cultural assets.
Ooh, what does that mean?
So it's this idea that most of us, each generation has sort of put money into an asset class. Like you have stocks, and Robinhood has made that a lot easier for you to invest via mobile into stocks. they believe that this new generation of people, millennials and Gen Zers, have an understanding of what is culturally relevant and valuable. So they do these drops, and you can create a portfolio of shares into these items. So an example of their first drop was a Kehinde Wiley painting. He was the portrait artist of the Obamas, and you can buy at $25 a share a piece of owning this painting. And they do a really great job explaining this sort of cultural asset, as well as how much it's going for, what price per share, and then how many investors are in it. But the idea around it, or the inspiration, so aside from artwork, which they have...
So wait, that one's super interesting. I've never heard of anything like that. So for that specific example, this person might drop a painting and say, hey, I want it to be valued at $25,000. I'm releasing 1,000 shares at $25 each. You can buy it. And then later, if it's sold for $50,000, your shares just went up. You could buy, sell as time goes on.
Exactly.
Super cool.
Yes, and then
can you do that with any asset? Like, can you do that with a song or? So
the company owns the assets themselves. ODIS owns the assets. They've bought them outright. And what's great about it is if you are a shareholder of any of their, aside from Kehinde Wiley, they have a Cause painting, they have Supreme skateboards, they have Air Jordans, Birkin bags, everything. They have a lot of different items. And there's an experience or sort of a space for all of these items in Brooklyn, and you can go and they host events in the space. So you can also be a part of this sort of experience.
I've always wanted to touch a Birkin bag.
Yeah.
So, such an honor.
Yeah. So that's what I think that the founder, Michael, he had this sort of inspiration around helping people have the portfolio of a billionaire. All of these alternative assets that none of us have access to, or many of us, I shouldn't say none of us, many of us who aren't billionaires have access to. You can now own a piece of it because it's culturally relevant and meaningful to you. And so I think it's kind of an interesting take on investing.
And what kind of questions do you ask somebody like that about what their plans for growth are? Would love to understand better the kinds of questions you ask these portfolio companies or companies that you're looking at doing your due diligence, and also how you think about giving advice with all your experience, but all the uncertainties that an early stage company is going through.
Well, I mean, in this case, it is somewhat, of a marketplace, and there's the supply piece and how they're acquiring that supply, and understanding like what is going into how they make those decisions on acquiring this kind of an artwork or that kind of a bag, like why those items, and then where do they get access to more of that supply, and then what's their sort of unique differentiated strategy of finding those items.
So you're just helping them, you're just making sure they're thinking clearly about these kinds of things.
Yeah, and that they have some unique insight into being able to acquire them either before anyone else can, or in a way that is differentiated from other kind of platforms that can do this. And then similarly, I think that the biggest challenge here is about driving demand. How are they going to
make me buy $25 worth of a painting?
Exactly, and educate, and have they done that already? So when they raised their A, they actually did their first drop, and they were able to sort of show that they were able to get, I think more than 600 investors, and many of them were non-accredited, to buy into this because of the cultural significance and people wanting to be a part of this movement.
To the extent that you're able to share or want to share, what are some of the things that they want to do to be able to grow that user base? Because I imagine that's super complicated, right? You got to teach people about how it's an investment. So they're saying, all right, can I buy $25 of this or $25 worth of General Motors? And which one's going to make me more money? General Motors, I know, I trust, I get it. Birkin bags, what the heck does that even mean? So you're educating on that class. You're educating them about just the fact that there's, a friend of a friend tells somebody, word of mouth. So how do they begin to think about growth?
So I think that there's a couple different aspects of things, right? Like I think they've done a really great job of, in some ways, building. So going back to creating some urgency. That each of these drops or each of these items are done in a drop fashion. So when they first released ODIS, you could sign up for the waitlist to get notified of the drop. The drop happens. Prior to that drop, I think they had a VIP part of that. So
they built up that urgency, that FOMO already pretty baked in there.
Yeah, and then they found
Put me on the wait list. They did that age-old trick.
Yes, they did. Put you on the wait list, and also they kind of had a white glove service for their VIP members, and they, as you signed up for the wait list, the SEC requires that you fill out a lot of stuff so that they can, so that it's not the easiest process right now, but at the same time, like I think they did a great job working with the SEC to enable this, and then, from that set, they cultivated a VIP set. In the very beginning of any sort of community or platform or service, like it's a very hands-on, high-touch way of growing that user base or that consumer base. And I think they did a great job doing that.
Well, hey, this podcast is brought to you by ODIS, the unpaid for advertisements of the NASDAQ of cultural assets. No, that is really awesome. Kat, it's totally up to you. We can chat for another 3 hours, which I can happily do. Or because I think you got some stuff going on.
Yes, I do. I have some drinks that I have to catch up with a friend on.
I would hate to delay that anymore. This has been a ton of fun. Kat, where can people find out more about you, about Maveron, and everything you got going on?
Yeah, on our website, or happily follow me on Twitter. And I've met the best people through Twitter DMs.
What's your what's your
Kat
handle?
Lee, Kat Lee.
Kat Lee, Kat Lee.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Kat Lee.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Kat Lee, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to learn more about Kat, check her out on Twitter at Kat Lee, Lee spelled L-E-E. Or find Maveron, the venture capital fund, and what they're working on at maveron.com. And if you like what you heard today, leave us a review and a rating. It is so helpful. Or you can find me all over the interwebs, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram at alubarski2. Happy selling.